r/NoSleep. Posted by CIAHerpes. I found my family's corpses buried in the forest. So who has been living with me in my house? Part 2. The 911 operator assured me that vehicles were en route, and that I should stay at the house with my neighbor Al until they made sure the area was safe. Under no circumstances should I go outside until the police arrived. It all sounded normal and sensible at the time, and I had no suspicion that things would become nightmarish and lethal within minutes. Al had listened to me frantically try to describe the situation to the 911 operator with wide eyes, his wrinkled old face showing fear and confusion. He had a cup of coffee in his hand, but he never drank any of it. "Is that true?" he asked after I hung up. "Brandy and Emma are dead? You found their bodies in the forest?" I nodded grimly. I hadn't told the 911 operator about the doppelgangers in the house or their bizarre and psychotic behavior. I figured once the police saw the bodies, my story would become a lot more believable, but I didn't want to sound like a lunatic over the phone, lest the police come and think I was some delusional maniac who had just murdered my own wife and daughter and was trying to cover my own ass by calling and reporting it. I had watched more than enough true crime shows to know that, whenever a wife or husband is murdered, their spouse is always the first suspect until cleared by forensics or an alibi. It seemed like no time passed when I heard tires screeching outside and vehicles pulling up in a frenzy. I looked outside, expecting to see police lights flashing, wondering why no sirens had sounded. My heart leapt into my throat when I saw 3 black SUVs filled with men in suits. They leapt out, holding automatic rifles. Without warning, they pointed the guns at the house and began firing. 15 dark silhouettes lined up on the street outside, looking like a firing squad at a military execution. When the first bullets exploded through the wall, I was so surprised that I didn't even move. I saw Al standing there with his mouth hanging open as a bullet shattered his coffee cup, sending the steaming hot black liquid all over the floor yet missing his hand entirely. A second later, another one came in and exploded through his chest. In slow motion, I saw a flower of blood blossom out from the gaping hole that suddenly appeared in the center of his heart. He didn't so much as cry out, but instead fell back instantly, moving his hands up as if in supplication as he clenched and unclenched his fingers. His mouth opened and closed silently as a puddle of blood rapidly spread out beneath him on the linoleum kitchen floor. Then my instinct kicked in. As glasses shattered and dishes exploded and light bulbs burst all around me, I jumped to the floor, crawling towards the back door, making myself as small a target as possible. At that moment, I didn't even realize I had dragged myself through the warm sticky mess pooling beneath Al's still body. His pupils dilated in death and his mouth opened in surprise. The blood completely covered my white shirt and blue jeans. I dragged my arms and hands through it as light after light went out, each bulb exploding in turn as gunfire strafed across the house over and over, left to right, then right to left, then left to right again. After what felt like an eternity, the shooting stopped. I had nearly reached the back door by this point. I also looked like a serial killer, with my clothing, shoes and skin mostly covered by Al's blood. It made me feel sick to my stomach, and a part of me wanted to rip the soiled clothes off and throw them to the side as I went. I jumped up, flinging the door open and running out into the dark night beyond. Behind me, I heard the front door smash open as the men kicked their way inside. The last thing I heard from that house was them running from room to room, yelling clear. And then I reached the border of the forest, and I was quickly swallowed up in the shadows of the trees. As I wandered blindly through the trees in mortal terror, covered in goosebumps and sweating heavily, I heard the men destroy the back door of the house. They had apparently cleared the house and realized I was no longer inside. Reality felt like a nightmare, dissociated and surreal. I couldn't believe any of this was happening, but my instincts took over, and with high amounts of adrenaline surging through my blood, I ran like I never have before. The men began to come out into the forest, sprinting, turning on bright LED lights attached to the ends of their automatic rifles. I had the advantage in that I knew these woods well. The men certainly had me beat on physical strength and stamina though. They all looked like gym rats, their muscles bulging under their black suits, their thick bodies striding forward with purpose. They all stood tall and still for a moment as their cold killer's eyes surveyed the surroundings, reptilian and emotionless. I heard more SUVs coming to a screeching halt in front of my house, and soon the sound of many dogs barking echoed across the forest. I knew they were tracking me, and they would soon find me and kill me. No one would ever know what had happened here, least of all me. And no one would ever be able to prevent it from happening again, with the destruction of the sole living witness to the bizarre replacement of my family. I ran towards a large rock formation I knew nearby, with small indentations allowing a man to fit in the wide cracks of the 30-foot-tall cylinders of stone. This was a place I liked to come and sit during happier times, sometimes just meditating and listening to the sound of the birds and breathing in the clean air of the woods. Now, I hoped in my time of desperation that it would come to my aid again. I heard the dogs getting closer and saw the lights separate into smaller and smaller groups as the agents combed every inch of the forest, sweeping their rifles up to down and left to right as they looked into every crevice and behind every tree. I saw a single light drawing near. My heart seemed to stop. I knelt down low, feeling the ground with my trembling fingers. I found a large, flat stone that must have weighed a good 10 pounds. Making myself as small a target as possible, I waited for the figure to pass right by my hiding spot. Even though this happened a couple months ago now, I still remember the rising waves of anxiety that gripped my heart as this assassin stood before me. As soon as the light began turning to examine the dark corners of the indentation I crouched in, I sprang forwards, waves of adrenaline giving me amazing strength and reflexes. The man saw me at the last moment, his eyes widening as his finger began to tighten on the trigger, and then I smashed the rock into the front of his skull. His neck twisted to the side, his eyes instantly drooping as his body went slack. I dropped the rock onto the leaf-strewn ground and caught him in the same movement, dragging his limp body back into the shallow groove of the rock where I hid. I took the automatic rifle off of him, flicking off the light and feeling around in his belt for extra magazines of ammunition. I found 3 extra clips. I fumbled around until I found a latch to release the magazines, unclipping them one after another and shoving them into my pockets. The man quickly started to stir, groaning and moving his head slowly from side to side, his eyes still clenched shut. "Oh," he mumbled, his eyes beginning to flutter. "Oh, my head. Jesus. What?" His blue eyes opened suddenly, and he looked directly at me, an icy hatred changing his expression in a single moment. "Oh, it's you. Julius Thorne," he spat my name with venom, staring directly at me even as blood trickled down his cheeks from his forehead. "Yeah, it's me," I said. "What the fuck is going on right now? Why did you psychopaths murder my neighbor and try to kill me?" He just shook his head and kept his mouth tightly shut. I waited a few seconds, giving him a chance to answer. When I realized he wasn't planning on talking, I sighed, steeling myself for what I knew I had to do. Raising the rifle up above my head, I quickly brought the butt of the gun down into the center of his nose. I heard it crunch, a fountain of blood exploding from the front of his face. He started to open his mouth to scream, but I turned the gun around and pointed it straight at his right eye. "If you scream, I'll kill you right here," I said. "I have nothing to lose right now, and I'd rather go down fighting." He bit his lip so deeply that a small trickle of blood began to stream down his chin, but he didn't scream or cry out, despite the immense pain he looked to be in. "Now maybe we can try this again," I said, giving him a grim smile. "Why did you guys want to kill me? Why are you chasing me?" "We are agents who have been tasked with detecting and destroying anomalies that have arisen across the United States," he said, scowling at me with hatred, his words coming out somewhat distorted as he constantly spat blood. "People usually call us the cleaners. Mostly we deal with incidents in small towns, like this one, though sometimes shit hits the fan in the cities too. Hell, just last week we had a werewolf in New York City. Press thought it was some serial killer who ripped apart his victims with a knife, but any coroner worth his salt would immediately be able to tell it had actually been claws and fangs. But we found him and brought him in for containment. He had already killed 3 joggers and 7 homeless people by then." "Yeah? So what does any of that have to do with me?" I asked, furious. I hated these men so badly at that moment. I had asked for help, and instead, assassins had come to my side. "Your wife and daughter are dead," he replied. "But you're not the first one to call and say you found the grave of your family. In every other case, the police found the people still alive and healthy in the house, and the graves totally empty by the time we got there. But there were always indications that the individuals still living had changed. They always began to show psychotic and violent behavior, and inevitably, they would kill their own family members, neighbors, hell, anyone in the area. When the anomaly is allowed to proceed, the entire town often ends up being destroyed. We lost over 10,000 people in a single incident last year. So we come in and contain it by killing anyone associated with the anomaly, to stop it from spreading. Because it does spread, and it seems to spread by association. It starts with a couple people on the street, then the rest of their house, then their next door neighbors, and keeps going outwards, like ripples spreading outwards in a pond. By this point, I heard dogs getting closer and closer, and saw lights flashing through the trees in the distance, aimed in my direction. I quickly ripped a strip of fabric from the agent's shirt and tied his hands and feet before binding his mouth so he couldn't scream. I knew they would still probably find him within 10 minutes or so, but that might be all I needed to get out of here. And now, at least, I had a gun. I sprinted out of the woods, taking the trail in the opposite direction of the agents. I had to move in the dark, which slowed me down significantly, but I had been on these trails 1,000 times before. Soon, the shouting of the man and the barking of the dogs grew faint behind me, and I came out on an empty side road. I knew the area well. Richie lived only a few blocks from here. Without thinking, I began to stagger down the road, the streetlights flashing on and off above me. I saw faces peering out of windows as I passed. I must have looked like a madman, being totally covered in blood with wide, panicked eyes that constantly snapped in the direction of the smallest sound. Yet, amazingly, not a single person came out of their house. I wondered how many of the faces were just those who were replaced, doppelgangers with the right human skin but without any of the human mind, except maybe for its most destructive and insane impulses. Within minutes, I found myself stumbling through Richie's front yard towards his little ranch house, a massive wraparound porch with pillars painted white in front of the light blue siding. He had Halloween decorations all over the place. A scarecrow was crucified in the front yard, fake blood streaming from its hands and feet. A massive painting of a reptilian humanoid with black, shining skin and tentacles coming out of its mouth stood in front of the porch, like some nightmare from an H.P. Lovecraft story. Fake gravestones were lined up, row after row of gray foam with skeletal hands rising out from the grass in front of them. I saw plumes of smoke rising from a chimney connected to the fireplace, the smell of wood smoke and decaying autumn leaves mixing in a pleasant scent that always reminds me of Halloween. I pounded on the door until Richie came and opened it. His eyes widened as he saw me. "Holy shit, Thorne, what happened?" he asked. I pushed past him, looking back furtively at the street and the dark forest stretching out before us. Hidden danger seemed to be everywhere. "Close the door," I told Richie. He quickly shut it and turned the deadbolt. He turned to me, his face pale, a shocked expression on his face. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "Whose blood is that? Is that yours?" "No," I said curtly, shaking my head. "I don't have time to explain it all now. Some men are after me. I think they're from the government. My neighbor is dead. My family is dead." I broke down then, crying. "I need help. I really need help right now." Okay, I believe you," he said reassuringly, putting a hand on my shoulder. "It's gonna be okay. That's a nice gun, by the way." He gave me a calming smile. I had nearly forgotten about the automatic rifle slung around my shoulder. I looked down at it with a blank expression, like I had just discovered a new limb on my body. "Hey, how about we get you a change of clothes and then we'll figure out what to do," he said. "Come with me to my room. I think you're about my size." I gratefully followed him. He gave me an old shirt and hoodie and a pair of jeans. I stripped off my bloody clothes, feeling how the drying, coagulating blood crackled under my dirt-stained fingers as I stripped. I felt a small sense of hope as I put on the clean clothes. I had my friend here with me now. I had escaped. I wasn't alone in this anymore, at least. At that moment, I heard a knock at the front door. It sounded light and hesitant, like the knocking of a small child. I walked quickly out of the room and saw Richie standing there, the front door standing wide open, a nightmarish shape standing on the porch. It looked like a person, but deep, blackened burns covered every inch of their skin. Only their eyes still had any humanity left, two shining pits of despair with green irises and massively dilated pupils. They constantly teared up and rolled from side to side in agony. The person held out their arms in front of them, as if they were in so much pain that they didn't even want their arms to touch their body. I couldn't tell the race or gender of the person through the immense damage to their body. Yellowish fluid mixed with bright trails of blood seeped from cracks in its destroyed skin. It constantly moaned. The weeping wounds all over its body cried constantly, and the smell of smoke and gasoline radiated off the dying person on the porch. The figure said. "Oh. God, help. Please." "Oh my God," Richie said, putting his hand over his mouth. "Holy shit. We need an ambulance here immediately." He furiously checked his pockets. Then he spun, his eyes in a blind panic. "My phone's upstairs. We need to call 911 right now." "No, Richie," I screamed. "When I called 911, those men came and tried to kill me. They're not on our side." I wished I had more time to explain. Richie heard the note of panic in my voice. His face was covered in a sheen of sweat, and the anxiety I felt seemed reflected in his expression. "Well, we have to do something," he said, a pleading tone in his voice. He looked like he wanted to turn and run away from the whole situation. Then he stopped and stared at the figure more closely. "Oh Jesus, is that you, Melissa?" With those words, my heart jumped into my throat. I turned to the figure with newfound horror. Melissa and Richie had dated for nearly a year. Looking closer at the figure, I could see that it did appear to be a woman, at least as far as I could tell from the curve of the body under the blackened skin. Melissa was white and thin, about 5'6". This thing with third-degree burns all over its body was certainly the right height and build. "It hurts," she said, her voice gurgling and loud. "Oh, it hurts so bad. Kill me. Please kill me." She waved her arms, as if trying to cool them with the crisp autumn air. "That's it, I'm calling an ambulance," Richie said, running past me. I followed closely behind him, leaving the door wide open. We went upstairs. He pulled his phone from its charger and opened it, dialing 911. He frowned, listening for what seemed like a long time. Then he gave me the phone. As I pressed it to my ear, I heard an emotionless message read by a robot with a woman's voice coming through. "Stay in your homes until the situation is resolved. Thank you for your help in this trying time." Then it began to repeat, starting at the beginning. "This is a recording. Emergency services in your area have been temporarily suspended. Help is on the way. Under Executive Order 718, martial law has been declared in your area. Until it arrives, please keep your doors locked and windows closed. Stay in your homes until the situation is resolved." "What the fuck is this?" Richie said, infuriated. "What do they mean, emergency services are temporarily suspended? Why don't we take her straight to the hospital?" I asked. His eyes brightened at this. "Yeah, let's do it. What other choice do we have? She needs help immediately. She's going to die without it," he said gloomily, his eyes growing moist. "But the phone says to stay inside." "I really hate to say it, but I think she's going to die regardless," I said. "No one can survive third-degree burns over the vast majority of their body." We moved back downstairs, the phone in Richie's hand. As we came down the stairs, we saw the front door still stood open. Melissa was gone. I ran forward, seeing drops of blood and pus on the deck where she had stood. Yet there was no sign of her. Where could she have gone? She couldn't have walked far in her condition. I was amazed she was still conscious at all. She must have been in some of the worst pain imaginable. I saw a figure walking up the porch stairs. I sighed, thinking Melissa had come back. And she had, in a way. She stood before us now, fully healed, her clothes new and unburned. She had an ear-to-ear grin across her face, and she kept one hand behind her back. "Richie," she said slowly, as if tasting the word. "Oh, Richie, I'm so happy to see you. A lot of strange things have happened tonight." Richie's eyes glistened as tears began to slide down his face. "Melissa?" he said, his voice cracking. "Oh my God, Melissa. It's really you, isn't it?" "Of course it is, baby," she said, moving a lock of blonde hair out of her face with her left hand. Her right stayed behind her back. She talked like Melissa, and she even seemed to have some of her mannerisms. But in her wide, staring eyes, there was a look of bloodlust and lunacy. "Richie, stay the hell back," I said. "That's not Melissa." But he ran forward, crying, his arms outstretched. I don't even know if he heard what I said. As he crossed the threshold of the door, Melissa pulled her hand from behind her back, revealing a huge, blood-stained butcher's knife. Raising it high, she ran forward, her eyes as cold as the vast empty spaces between worlds.